my God, what the hell is this? That was the first thing I said when I realized someone had been watching me inside my own home. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy, and I'm not telling it to shock you. I'm telling it because what happened to me could happen to any woman my age who believes that family automatically means safety. My name is Clara Dupree. I am 62 years old, a widow, and the person who betrayed me was my own daughter. But the story didn't begin there. It started a few hours earlier, when my daughter Melissa showed up with one of those plastic pill organizers and a casserole I didn't ask for. She stormed into my kitchen like a gust of cold wind, already frowning before I said a word. "You didn't take your blood pressure pills this morning," she said, holding up the Monday slot of the organizer like it was a smoking gun. "It's still full." I blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I must have forgotten." "You must have, Mom. You can't keep forgetting." "We talked about this." "I don't even remember you mentioning new medication," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "When did my doctor prescribe these?" Melissa's jaw clenched. "I picked them up for you last week. Don't you remember?" God, sometimes I don't know what to do with you. She sounded tired, angry, not worried angry. That was the first moment something shifted in my chest. I'd raised this girl with everything I had. I'd worked double shifts at the library, packed her lunches with little handwritten notes, made her costumes for school plays with trembling fingers and too little sleep. I had loved her through every stage of life, even the hard ones. But now she was talking to me like I was some stranger she had to manage. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I'm just a little foggy today. But she didn't smile. She put the pill box down hard on the counter and crossed her arms. "You've been off lately. You forget things. You asked me the same question twice last Sunday. I'm doing my best to help you, and you act like I'm the problem." That stung. Not because of what she said, but how fast she said it, like she'd rehearsed it. So I asked, gently, "Melissa, why are you really here so often lately?" She blinked at me, the mask slipping for a split second. Then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She looked hurt. Her eyes watered, her mouth trembled, and she took a shaky breath like she was the one being wronged. "Are you accusing me of something?" she said, voice cracking. "You think I want to be here every weekend? You think I enjoy watching you fade?" "Fade?" I echoed. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" She wiped at her eyes, annoyed. "Forget it. I'm just trying to make sure you're okay. God, I can't do anything right." She grabbed her coat and left, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the kitchen for a long while, her words echoing in the silence like the fading ring of a bell. Was I wrong to ask? Was she right? But something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the pills, or the tone. It was the way she turned it around, made herself the victim when I asked a fair question, and that was the exact moment a seed of doubt began to root deep in my gut. Still, I chose to believe her, because I loved her. Because when it's your child, and you raise them with everything you had, your heart doesn't want to believe they'd ever do you harm. But that was a few hours ago. Now, standing on a step stool in the hallway, holding the smoke detector that had just revealed a camera staring into my bedroom, all of that belief shattered. The device was heavier than normal. I noticed it the moment I twisted it free. And when I opened the casing, there it was. A tiny black lens, carefully installed beside the battery, angled to capture every movement in and out of my room. Not something from a bargain bin. Not a cheap nanny cam. This was professional, clean, purposeful. I descended the step stool slowly, my legs trembling. I walked to the kitchen table and placed the detector down, staring at it like it might speak. She wouldn't. Would she? She had access. She had keys. She had motive. She'd been pressuring me about my memory, asking too many questions, managing my medication, and now this? No, I didn't want to believe it, but I also wasn't going to ignore it. I put the smoke detector back together, screwed it into the ceiling just as it had been, and stepped back. I looked up at the camera. It looked back at me. Let her think I didn't know. Let her keep watching. That afternoon, she returned. I didn't bring up the fight. Neither did she. Instead, she walked in with a softer smile, set down a grocery bag, and immediately commented, "You look tired, Mom." I gave her a look, then nodded. Didn't sleep much. Her eyes flicked upward toward the hallway ceiling. My heart pounded. I kept my face calm. She busied herself with my mail, lifted a bank envelope, and said, "They keep sending these. I could help you go paperless if you want. Online banking is easier. I smiled with only half my mouth. I like having something I can hold in my hands. She shrugged, pretending to accept it, but I saw the frustration behind her eyes. She stayed for lunch, watching me as much as talking. I played the role she expected, forgetful, slow, passive. When she left, she kissed my cheek and said, "I just want what's best for you." But for the first time in my life, I didn't know what that meant coming from her. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The camera was there, and I knew it, watching me sleep. Watching me not sleep. If Melissa had placed it there and God help me, I was starting to believe she had, then I needed to know why. So I let her think I was slipping. Because if my daughter had turned against me, I wasn't going to scream or panic. I was going to watch her back. If you felt what I felt, hit like and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Who knows? Someone nearby might be watching this story too. The next morning, I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for me, one for no one. I hadn't had anyone to share breakfast with in over a decade, but I still caught myself setting 2 places at the table sometimes. That morning, it was comforting, in a strange way, familiar, but nothing else felt familiar anymore. I sat at the table, staring out the window at the small patch of frozen lawn behind the house, steam curling from my mug. Every so often, I glanced up toward the hallway where the camera watched silently from the ceiling. I imagined Melissa seeing me like this, half-dressed in my robe, face creased from sleep, holding that chipped mug from the Yellowstone trip we took when she was 16. Would she feel guilt? Or would she just be taking notes? I wasn't going to wait to find out. After breakfast, I pulled out my notebook. Not the one she knew about, but the little blue one I kept tucked between the pages of my old hymnal. That book had held grocery lists, poetry drafts, and now evidence. I wrote everything I could remember from the day before, her exact words about the pills, her body language, the way she turned my questions into accusations. I noted the time she arrived and left. I added a small sketch of the smoke detector and its camera placement. The notebook shook slightly in my hands, but not from fear, from resolve. Melissa thought she was documenting my decline. But I'd spent a lifetime helping others find the truth in libraries and archives. She wasn't the only one keeping records now. Around noon, I bundled up and went to the living room, a space I once cherished but now walked through cautiously. I checked the light fixtures. I looked behind the books on the shelf. My heart sank when I found a second camera nestled behind the glass of the old clock mounted on the wall. The lens was barely visible through the Roman numeral 3. You would never know unless you were looking. I took a step back and stared at the room, trying to see it not as my home, but as a surveillance zone. From the hallway, from the living room, she could track where I walked, when I slept, how often I sat still. I started to feel sick. Then I thought, what else had she seen? I returned to the kitchen and scanned everything. I pulled out drawers, checked inside light switches, nothing. But then, when I stood back up, something caught my eye, a small glint behind the coffee maker. I reached behind it and found a black plastic device, the size of a lipstick tube, magnetically attached to the underside of the cabinet. A third camera. My knees buckled. I had to sit down. Not even my kitchen was mine anymore. I clutched the notebook to my chest and whispered, "Why, Melissa?" But the room had no answer. That evening, she came back. I heard her car long before I saw her face. The gravel drive always told me who was coming. Melissa drove fast, like the world owed her time back. She came in with that same smile, but her eyes were sharper this time, searching my face for signs of deterioration. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she asked, setting down a brown paper bag on the counter. I faked a little confusion. "What day is it again?" Her eyes sparkled, but not with kindness. "Monday." "Oh, right." I tapped my temple gently. "I've been mixing them up lately. I have to doesn't." She walked around the kitchen with confidence, opening drawers, tossing out a can of expired soup without asking. Then she turned. "Have you thought about what we talked about? About seeing a specialist?" I looked down at my mug. "Not really." "Mom," she said, her voice turning firm. "I already called a clinic in Edmonton. They're booked for months, but I pulled a few strings. We have an appointment in 3 weeks. It's just a wellness visit, cognitive stuff. You know, early detection, prevention, everyone's doing it." I blinked slowly. I don't remember agreeing to that. You didn't have to, she said, pouring herself a glass of water. I'm your daughter. I can make suggestions when I see you slipping. That word again. Slipping. As if I were ice under her feet. As if I wasn't a person, but a hazard. I gave her a tight smile and changed the subject. Over dinner, leftover lasagna I had made, and she didn't compliment, she asked questions about my finances. Innocently phrased. Still banking with the same branch? Do you have online access yet? Want me to help sort your bills? Each time, I gave a vague answer. She was probing, testing the waters. After she left, I sat down in the living room and wrote everything down, word for word. I added a small diagram of where each camera had been found. I sketched the route Melissa walked in the kitchen and the spots she lingered. It was tedious. It was exhausting. But it was the only way I could fight back. Later that night, I opened an old shoebox in the closet. Inside was a list of names and numbers I hadn't looked at in years, friends from my old life. One name jumped out at me, Henry Carter, retired RCMP. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered him as decent, trustworthy. I wrote his number in my notebook. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed someone who knew more than I did, someone who could see what I saw and wouldn't call it paranoia. Because this wasn't slipping. This was strategy, and I was done pretending not to see it. The phone rang 3 times before I heard his voice gruff, steady, and unmistakably him. Henry Carter. It's Clara Dupree, I said, surprised at how shaky I sounded. From Red Deer. A pause. Then his tone softened. Clara? Well, I'll be damned. It's been, 10 years? 12, almost, I said. Listen, I wouldn't be calling if it weren't important. I heard him shift in his seat, like he knew instinctively that this wasn't a social call. You okay? No, I said honestly. Not even a little. We met the next day at a Tim Hortons halfway between our towns. I hadn't seen him since my husband's funeral, but Henry looked mostly the same, grayer, a little heavier, but his eyes were still sharp, still scanning like a man trained to see danger before it struck. He brought his coffee to the table and sat across from me, both hands wrapped around the cup. Talk to me, he said. I reached into my purse and pulled out the notebook. I think my daughter is spying on me, I said. I found cameras in my house, one in the smoke detector outside my bedroom, another in the living room clock, and one behind the coffee maker. He didn't laugh. He didn't question my sanity. He didn't give me that soft, condescending smile people reserve for women of a certain age when we say something that makes them uncomfortable. He just nodded. Go on. She's been pushing this narrative for months now, I said, keeping my voice low. That I'm forgetful, confused. She's asking about my meds, my sleep, my finances. A few days ago, she yelled at me for forgetting a pill she claims to have picked up for me, but I never saw the prescription. She's trying to make me doubt myself. Henry took a slow sip of coffee. And you think she's trying to build a case? I nodded. A case that I'm not fit to live alone, that I need guardianship, power of attorney, whatever it takes to get control of what I own. He tapped the notebook with one finger. You wrote all this down? Every word. Every date. Every visit. I must say. He leaned back and exhaled through his nose. I saw cases like this before I retired, mostly handled by adult protective services. Elder abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it's bank withdrawals and forged signatures. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from the relief of being believed. What do I do, Henry? You need someone with more tools than I've got, he said. I know a woman. Patricia Fong. Private investigator out of Edmonton. Used to work white-collar crimes for the province. She specializes in elder financial abuse now. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. She's the real deal, he said. And Clara, whatever you decide to do, you've got to move carefully. If Melissa is as deep into this as it sounds, she won't back off just because you start fighting back. People don't do all this unless they plan to finish it. I took the card. My fingers brushed over the raised print. The name felt foreign in my hands, like a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. But I knew I had to. Thank you, Henry. He nodded once. And Clara? Yeah? Don't go home tonight without checking your car for trackers. I followed his advice. I checked under the bumper and wheel wells. I didn't find anything, But I parked 2 streets away from my house anyway, walked the last few blocks under the cover of dusk. It was strange, sneaking into your own home like a criminal. I used to leave the porch light on as a welcome sign. Now I kept everything dark, curtains drawn, lights off. The cameras watched me come in, same as always. I moved slow, played my part. Old woman, sleepy, distracted. Just another night alone with her memories. But I didn't go to bed. I waited until midnight, then turned on the old landline phone in the guest room, one I disconnected a year ago when nobody called it anymore. I plugged it in and dialed Patricia's number. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "This is Patricia." "Patricia," I whispered. "My name is Clara Dupree. I was referred by Henry Carter." Silence for a second, then a clear, professional tone. "I'm listening." End quote. "I think my daughter is trying to steal everything I own." The next morning, we met in a discreet office above a print shop in downtown Edmonton. Patricia was in her 50s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes like a hawk in human form. She didn't smile when I came in, and I appreciated that. She didn't offer sympathy or tea. She offered attention. That was more than enough. I told her everything. I read straight from the notebook. I showed her sketches of the camera placements. I told her about the pills, the memory games, the bank envelopes Melissa kept picking up. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the legal pad in front of her. "This matches a pattern I've seen before," she said. "Adult children who feel entitled to their parents' assets. They don't see it as stealing. They see it as securing their future." I looked down. "She used to bring me flowers on Mother's Day." "She still might," Patricia said. "And still try to put you in a care facility by summer. These people live with a duality you can't afford to underestimate." "What do I do?" "We start by tracing your finances. I'll look into Morrison Financial Services. My guess? It's a shell company tied to someone close to your daughter. If so, we'll find it. We also need to document the surveillance serial numbers, types of cameras, where they transmit. You've done a good job so far. Keep playing the role. Don't let on you're aware. But aren't of the same to Makative the Mose. And then, when we've got enough, we go to the police with a case they can't ignore." I exhaled. "Okay." She looked at me squarely. "Clara, I need to ask, are you safe at home?" I hesitated. "For now." She nodded. "Then let's keep it that way. But make no mistake, this is going to escalate. The closer you get to the truth, the more desperate she'll become." I swallowed hard. "I'm not afraid of her." Patricia folded her hands. "Good. Then let's begin." Arlie. By the time I drove back home from Edmonton, the sun was already sinking low over the fields, staining the sky in soft oranges and bruised purples. I'd made this drive hundreds of times in my life, but that evening it felt different. Every mile marker felt like a countdown. Every passing truck made my shoulders tense. Patricia's words echoed in my head. This is going to escalate. When I pulled into my driveway, Melissa's car was already there. My first instinct was to turn around and keep driving, to circle the block, to give myself time to think, to breathe. But the cameras were watching. Whatever version of me Melissa believed in, the confused, compliant mother that woman wouldn't run. So I parked. She was waiting in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like she owned the place. Her coat was still on, her purse resting on the chair. She looked up the moment I walked in, relief and irritation flickering across her face in quick succession. "Where have you been?" she asked. "I called you twice." I slipped my keys into the bowl by the door, deliberately slow. "I went for a drive. I told you yesterday I might." "You didn't say you were going out of town," she snapped, then caught herself. She softened her voice. "Mom, you can't just disappear like that. What if something happened to you?" I met her eyes. "What if it did?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer and touched my arm, her fingers cool and firm. "That's exactly what I'm worried about." I nodded, as if considering her words. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She poured herself a glass of water and sighed. "I talked to Greg today." Of course she had. "He agrees with me," she continued. "This situation isn't sustainable. You living out here alone, managing everything by yourself, it's too much. You shouldn't have to struggle." "I'm not struggling," I said quietly. She gave me that look again, the one that mixed pity with frustration. "You don't even realize when you are." There it was, the narrative, the slow erosion of my own voice. She sat at the table, right where the camera in the clock could see us both. "I made an appointment for you," she said casually. "A cognitive assessment, just to be safe. They queers everyone of noun." My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "You did what?" "It's nothing dramatic," she said quickly. "Just some tests. Memory, orientation, that sort of thing. People your age do it all the time." "My age," I repeated. "Mom," she said, exasperated. "Why are you making this into something it's not? I'm trying to help you." I turned toward her slowly. "Did I ask for help?" Her face hardened. "No, but you need it." The room felt smaller all of a sudden. The walls, the ceiling, the camera lenses hidden in plain sight. I was aware of all of it, every second. I chose my words carefully. "You've been in my house a lot lately, Melissa. You go through my mail, you manage my medication, you make appointments without asking. That's a lot." She stared at me, stunned. Then, just like before, her expression shifted. "So now I'm the villain," she said, her voice rising. "I rearrange my life for you. I drive hours every week. I worry myself sick. And this is how you talk to me?" "I didn't say that," I replied. "You didn't have to," she shot back. Her eyes filled with tears that came too fast, too easily. "Dad would be so disappointed in you right now." That one landed like a slap. She stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "Do you have any idea what it's like watching your mother fade and refuse help? Do you think this is easy for me?" I watched her, this woman I had once held against my chest, screaming into the night as a newborn. Somewhere along the way, I had taught her how to weaponize emotion. "I'm tired," I said softly. "Can we talk about this another time?" She stopped pacing and looked at me sharply. "You're avoiding this." "I'm overwhelmed." "Iris," she hesitated, then nodded, clearly deciding to retreat for now. "Fine, but we can't keep pretending everything's okay." After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade. My legs felt weak. I had to sit down. I opened my notebook with shaking hands and wrote everything down. The appointment, her exact phrasing, the way she used my husband's memory against me. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do yet. I checked my bank statements. I logged in using the old desktop in my office, my back straight, my movements careful. The camera was pointed directly at the desk. I imagined Melissa watching later, seeing me squint at the screen, taking too long to type. The numbers didn't make sense. My savings account was lower than it should have been, significantly lower. I refreshed the page, checked again. My stomach dropped. Nearly $140,000 was gone, transferred out in chunks over the past 4 months. 15,000, 25,000, 30,000, all to the same place. Morrison Financial Services. I stared at the name, my pulse roaring in my ears. I had never heard of that company. I had never authorized those transfers. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't concern. This wasn't control. This was theft. I logged out, forced myself to breathe, and closed the notebook. The house was silent, but I had never felt so watched. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, fully aware of the camera above me, recording every breath, every shift. I thought about the appointment she mentioned, about the pills, about the money disappearing quietly while she smiled and called it help. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my freedom, my dignity, my life. And Melissa wasn't done yet. I could feel it. She was pushing, testing, seeing how far she could go. I closed my eyes and made myself a promise. I would not confront her. I would not warn her. I would let her keep believing I was slipping. Because the more she underestimated me, the more she would reveal. And when the truth finally came out, it would not be gentle. I didn't tell Patricia everything over the phone that night. I needed to say it in person, but I gave her just enough. "There's a company called Morrison Financial Services," I said. "They've been receiving large transfers from my account." "Got it," she replied. "I'll start digging." The next morning, I took the long way into town, avoiding the main roads. I left my cell phone at home, just in case Melissa had figured out a way to track it. I carried only a notepad, cash, and the address of the Alberta Provincial Library. I hadn't been there since I retired, but the smell hit me the second I walked in: old paper, ink, and floor polish. It comforted me more than I expected. I settled into one of the back computer terminals, checked to make sure no one was watching, and logged into my online banking again. This time, I printed everything. Every transfer, every statement. I highlighted each entry tied to Morrison Financial Services and wrote the date and amount beside it. Patricia had asked me to gather everything, so I did. It felt like homework, but urgent, like failing this assignment would mean losing everything I'd spent my life building. Once I had the documents in hand, I slipped them into a plain manila folder and walked across town to a tiny diner that smelled like bacon grease and cinnamon. I sat in the back booth and waited. Patricia arrived 10 minutes later. She slid into the seat across from me, wearing dark jeans, a weathered leather jacket, and no makeup. She looked like someone who had seen the underbelly of things and decided to live there until it gave up its secrets. "You brought statements?" she asked without greeting. I handed her the folder. She flipped through the pages quickly, her lips moving slightly as she read. "Consistent withdrawals," she murmured. "Same company, same intervals, all within the last 4 months. And this company doesn't exist in any government registry I've checked. So it's fake. It's not Foreman in a Porst. It's a shell," she confirmed. "Most likely registered under a numbered company or a stolen identity, but I'll find it." She looked up. "You said your daughter's husband is named Greg?" "Gregory Morrison," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "You think there's a connection?" I didn't. Not until just now. She leaned back, thinking, "I'll run a cross-check. If this company's registered under his name or anything that leads to him, we'll have a direct link." I felt sick. Not just in my stomach, but in my bones. "My daughter may be trying to have me declared mentally unfit," I said quietly. "She's pushing hard. Memory comments, health concerns. She scheduled an evaluation in Edmonton." Patricia tapped her fingers on the table. "That's part of the pattern. Surveillance comes first, then control of finances. The final stage is legal guardianship. What happens if they succeed?" "They gain full legal control," she said. "They can sell your home, drain your accounts, even decide where you live. Once that power of attorney is in place, if it's not already, they don't need your consent to do anything." I blinked. "That can't be real. That can't be legal." "It is," she said. "If a doctor deems you mentally unfit and the power of attorney is activated, it's completely legal." I stared down at the table. My knuckles were white around the ceramic coffee cup. "She's my daughter. It's first problems." Patricia's voice softened, but not much. "I've worked over 60 of these cases. Half the time, the victims are too ashamed to act. The other half, they don't even realize it's happening until they've lost everything." I didn't respond. I couldn't. "I need you to keep playing the role," she said. "Don't let her see that you're onto her. Let her think you're slipping." "I can do that," I said, though it made me feel like something small and hollow. "She'll keep pushing. Watch what she says next. Try to get her on record if possible. Leave a recorder on, even if it's just a phone tucked under a cushion. She checks everything. Then we get creative." Patricia stood and slipped the folder back toward me. "We'll meet again in 3 days. I'll come to you next time. But Clara," "Yes, if things escalate, if she moves up her timeline or tries to have you committed sooner, you call me." I nodded. "And you be ready." That evening, Melissa came back. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. "I brought dinner," she called from the kitchen. "Thought we could eat together." I stayed seated in the living room, pretending to read a magazine that was 3 months old. She poked her head in. "Mom?" "Yes, dear? You okay?" "Just tired." She nodded, but her eyes searched me. "Well, maybe you'll feel better after eating. I made that mushroom risotto you like." End quote. "Even partly cleaning and stand." End quote. I didn't remind her that I hadn't liked mushrooms since 1998. That would be too sharp, too clear-minded. Instead, I smiled. "That's lovely." We ate in near silence. She talked about Greg's work, something about insurance settlements, clients, paperwork. I nodded and let her fill the space. Then she brought it up. "So, I confirmed the appointment for next Thursday, with the cognitive specialist." I blinked. "You mean the memory thing?" "Yes," she said. "It's just a screening. Standard stuff. Honestly, I'm proud of you for being open to it." I nodded slowly. "I just want what's best." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I do too, Mom." Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to dance in the living room wearing a tutu and her dad's work boots. But then her grip tightened. Not hard, but firm. I looked down at our joined hands and felt a cold chill spread through my chest. After she left, I went to the back bedroom and sat in the dark. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned on the little recorder Patricia had given me disguised as an old pocket calculator and listened to Melissa's voice again, over and over. I confirmed the appointment. "I'm proud of you. I just want what's best." I wrote down every word. The noose was tightening, but now I could feel it, and that meant I could still get out. I woke up the next morning with the weight of the recorder still in my robe pocket. I had forgotten to take it out before bed, and somehow that felt like a small victory, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that I still had the presence of mind to keep it with me. I made coffee as usual and opened my notebook at the kitchen table, flipping back through the pages. The handwriting had become smaller, tighter, more frantic, but the information was solid. Dates, times, quotes. A clear pattern was emerging: Melissa's weekly visits, her increasing pressure, her attempts to isolate me from decision-making. I paused on one page where I had drawn a rough floor plan of the house. 3 X's marked known camera locations, but something about it nagged at me. I walked through the house slowly, mug in hand. The kitchen camera had been behind the coffee maker. The smoke detector, of course, was still in the hallway. The living room clock, positioned perfectly to watch where I sat to read. But what about my office? That was the room she had asked about most, where I kept my papers, my bank books, the photo albums and records from when Harold and I refinanced the farm 15 years ago. I stood in the doorway of the office, letting my eyes adjust to the morning light. The desk was neat, as always. My father's old desk, passed down to me when he died. The wood still smelled faintly of cedar. I walked around to the chair, sat down, and looked up. There, just above the doorframe, a camera tucked neatly inside the molding, hidden behind a decorative lattice that had once held an old family photo. My throat tightened. She had been watching me work, watching me pay bills, watching me write in my notebooks. I closed the door and pulled the curtain shut. For the first time, I let a single tear fall. Just one. Then I wiped it away, stood up straight, and called Patricia. We met that afternoon in the same diner, corner booth. I showed her the new camera, described where it was hidden. Patricia whistled low. "That placement is deliberate. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing." "Greg?" I asked. "Could be. Especially if he has insurance or security credentials. I'll check." "Did you find anything else?" I hesitated, then pulled out the envelope Melissa had left in the kitchen a few visits ago. I hadn't opened it at the time, not wanting her to know I was curious. Now, I carefully slid it open with a butter knife. Inside was a pre-printed legal form and updated power of attorney agreement. My name was already typed in. Melissa's was listed as my designated agent. The signature line had my name too, in my handwriting, but I had never signed it. Patricia leaned in, scanning the paper. "This is forgery." "It's a good one," I said, "but I didn't sign it." I think she copied it from a birthday card I gave Tyler last month. She saw me write it and offered to mail it. Patricia nodded grimly. "That's how they do it. One little thing at a time, and by the time the victim realizes, their name is on contracts they never saw." "What do we do now?" "We go to the RCMP," she said. "With this forgery, the banking records, and proof of surveillance, we have enough to open a fraud case. And Melissa, she'll find out eventually, but not from you." End quote. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind tap against the window. The camera watched silently from above. I thought of all the ways Melissa had changed in the past year. The missed birthdays, the sudden interest in my medical care, the half-hearted casseroles and constant checking of my drawers. But the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was the loss of the story I had told myself for decades, that my daughter loved me the way I loved her. That she saw me not as a burden, but as her mother. At 3 a.m, I slipped out of bed and walked barefoot into the living room. The moonlight painted everything in silver and shadows. I sat in my chair and opened the old album I kept on the shelf. Photos of Melissa as a baby. Melissa in kindergarten, clutching a yellow lunchbox. Melissa in her prom dress, hair frizzed from Alberta humidity. Melissa holding her own newborn son. Somewhere in that timeline, something shifted. but I didn't see it. I was too busy loving her. The next day, Patricia called with news. Morrison Financial Services is a ghost company, she said. No phone number, no website, but the corporate registration was filed 6 months ago in British Columbia. My stomach flipped. Greg is from BC. And the director of record? She continued. Gregory Morrison. I closed my eyes. He didn't even bother to hide it. They rarely do, Patricia said. They assume they're smarter than everyone else. Where's the money now? She hesitated. It was transferred from Morrison Financial into a numbered account in the Cayman Islands, then returned to a holding company registered in Alberta. A shell within a shell, I murmured. She paused again. Clara, that holding company made a bid last week. I gripped the phone tighter. On what? Your farm. My heart stopped. No one has authority to sell it, I said. I never. You don't, she cut in gently, but someone acting on your behalf does. I sat down hard. That's not possible. The power of attorney was filed with the court 3 weeks ago, she said. Melissa is listed as your legal representative, effective immediately. I felt the walls around me collapse. I never signed anything. They traced your signature, Patricia said softly. Probably from a card, a check, something small. It's textbook. I've seen it before. I couldn't speak. They've already started the paperwork, she continued. We need to act now. I'll set up a meeting with the RCMP. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse. But Clara, this means war, I whispered into the silence. Then let's make sure we're ready. I sat in the back seat of Patricia's old Honda Civic, parked just outside the RCMP detachment in Leduc. The sky was heavy with snow clouds, and the cold seeped through the windows like a warning. You ready? She asked. I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. We walked inside together. The officer at the front desk was a young man, barely older than my grandson. He greeted Patricia with a nod. She clearly wasn't a stranger here. Detective Mark Haynes is expecting us, she said. We were led to a small interview room. It was nothing like the interrogation rooms on television, no mirrored glass, no dramatic lighting. Just a plain table, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues that made me feel worse than I already did. Detective Haynes came in with a file already under his arm. He was in his late 40s, with a calm, measured demeanor. He introduced himself and offered me a warm handshake. Miss Dupree, Patricia's given me some of the basics, he said, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. I took a deep breath and began. I told him everything from the strange behavior that started months ago, to the pills Melissa insisted I take, to the cameras I found in my home. I laid out the forged power of attorney, the financial theft, and the corporate shell game linking Greg to Morrison Financial Services. I handed over the bank statements, the audio recordings, and the false legal documents Melissa had left behind. Detective Haynes listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes but never interrupting. When I finished, the room was silent. Then he said, "You've done everything right." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. He continued, "We'll begin an official investigation immediately. I'll need access to your bank's fraud department, and we'll coordinate with the Alberta Land Titles Office to freeze any pending transactions on your property." "You can do that?" I asked, stunned. He nodded. "With this much probable cause, absolutely. We can't reverse what's been done yet, but we can stop it from going further." Patricia leaned forward. "What about charges?" "That depends on what we uncover," he said. "But forgery, identity theft, elder abuse, financial exploitation, those are serious. If we can prove Greg and Melissa collaborated on this, they'll both be liable." I looked down at my hands, folded tightly in my lap. I never imagined I'd be here, reporting my own daughter. "You're not reporting your daughter," Patricia said gently. "You're protecting yourself. That's not betrayal, it's survival." That evening, back home, I found myself checking every drawer, every corner. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a crime scene. I wrapped the cameras in towels and sealed them in a shoebox. Patricia said the RCMP would retrieve them for evidence. At 7:12 p.m., Melissa called. "Hey, Mom," she said, cheerful as ever. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" "Fine," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You sound tired." "Long day. You sure you're all right?" "Why wouldn't I be?" A pause. "Just asking. You've been off lately." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Maybe I'm just tired of being watched." Another pause. Longer this time. Excuse me? I said. Maybe I'm just tired. That's all. She didn't speak right away. Then, with forced sweetness, she said, Well, don't forget your pills. I'll come by tomorrow. I'd rather you didn't. Her tone dropped. What? I said I need a few days to myself. Is something wrong? Not at all. End quote. The silence on the other end was thick. Then she hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, Patricia arrived with news. They froze the land title, she said, barely inside the door, and the RCMP subpoenaed Greg's financial records. He's going to know we're on to him by the end of the day. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Then we're running out of time. They'll scramble, Patricia agreed. They might try to confront you, scare you, or even pressure you into retracting your statement. I'm not afraid of them anymore, I said. But the truth was I was. Not of what they might say, but what they were still willing to do. At 9:23 that night, Melissa showed up. No call, no warning. She knocked hard, loud, impatient. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, notebook pressed to my chest. Mom, she shouted through the door. I know you're in there. Open up. I didn't move. She kept banging. I know you talked to someone. What did you say? What lies are you spreading about us? Us. She had just confirmed everything. The banging stopped. Then, silence. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I finally crept to the front window and peeked through the curtain. Her car was gone, but my hands were still shaking long after. That night, I packed a bag. Just the essentials, medications, cash, my notebook, and the folder of documents Patricia and I had prepared. I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, staring into the dark, listening for any sound outside. Melissa's visit had crossed a line, and in the morning, I would cross one of my own. Because now, it wasn't just about preventing the sale of the farm. It was about reclaiming the woman I had been before. Fear crept into my bones, and silence became my only defense. By sunrise, I was already on the highway. I drove my late husband's old truck, the one Melissa always called that rust bucket. She never understood why I kept it, why I refused to sell it for something newer, sleeker, with Bluetooth and heated seats. But that truck had carried our family through blizzards and funeral processions. It didn't have GPS, no tracking. And today, that was exactly what I needed. I didn't go far, just to an old friend's farmhouse 2 towns over. Evelyn Cummings. We hadn't spoken in years, but I knew she'd open her door. She did. Clara? She said, blinking in the morning light. Well, I'll be. I need a few days, I said. Is that all right? She didn't ask why. She just stepped aside. Evelyn's guest room hadn't changed since the 80 seconds floral wallpaper, a heavy oak dresser, and a quilt her sister made from scraps of childhood dresses. It was perfect, safe, a place Melissa didn't know existed. I called Patricia from Evelyn's landline. She showed up last night, I said, yelling through the door. Did she threaten you? Not directly, but she knew. She knew I went to the police. Patricia was silent for a beat. Then, I spoke to Haynes. Greg's financial records confirm everything. Money laundering, forged documents, multiple transfers to offshore accounts. It's bigger than we thought. Melissa's just the front, I whispered. Greg's been running this. She's not innocent, Patricia said flatly. She signed off on everything. She presented the forged power of attorney. She initiated the property sale. She's complicit. I closed my eyes. What happens now? The RCMP will bring them in for questioning within 48 hours. Once they see the evidence, it'll move fast. But you need to stay off the radar until then. They're unstable now. Desperate. I'm not going back home, I said. Not yet. Good, she said. Don't tell anyone where you are. Not even Tyler. My heart ached at the mention of my grandson. He'd always been gentle, honest. But I couldn't be sure who had access to his phone, to his calendar, to his loyalties. Not yet. That afternoon I sat with Evelyn on her porch, sipping coffee from chipped mugs and watching geese cut across the sky. I told her everything. She didn't gasp. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she said, "You always were too generous for your own good." I raised her. I whispered, "How did I miss this?" Evelyn shook her head. "You didn't miss it. You trusted her. That's not the same." I nodded, though my chest still felt hollow. Then she added something I hadn't expected. Clara, Melissa's not the only one doing this. I looked up. There's a group, she said. They find vulnerable elders, ones with property, pensions, inheritance. They start small. Guilt trips, doctor visits. Then come the lawyers, the guardianship papers. I saw it happen to my cousin in Calgary. By the time anyone noticed, she was in a care home and everything she owned was gone. I felt my blood run cold. Melissa's not smart enough to build this whole thing, Evelyn continued, but she sure as hell could follow instructions. I stood up, pacing. You think Greg's part of something bigger? I think he's the recruiter. It made sense. His vague job, his sudden interest in elder care, the shell companies, the Cayman accounts. What do we do? I asked. You expose it, she said. Not just to the cops, to everyone. That night, I called Patricia again. We need more than a fraud case, I said. We need to go public. She was quiet. Then, I've been thinking the same thing. Can you get a reporter? I know someone. Investigative journalist, works freelance now. Used to do exposés for CBC. Let's bring it to her. The next day, I met Patricia and the journalist Lena Mitchell in the back room of a bookstore in Edmonton. Lena looked exactly how you'd picture a truth digger. Blunt haircut, canvas jacket, no-nonsense voice. She asked questions for over 2 hours, recording everything. She took photos of the forged documents, the bank records, even the cameras I'd packed up and delivered. When I told her about the pill organizer, about Melissa's accusations of memory loss, Lena leaned forward. That's textbook gaslighting, she said. They isolate you, question your mind, make others doubt you. By the time the money's gone, people think it's your own fault. I stared at her. How many people go through this? More than you want to know, she said, but they're too embarrassed to talk. I nodded. Not this time. Before I left the city, I stopped at a park by the river. I sat on a bench near the water, watching ducks drift by like they had nowhere better to be. I opened my notebook, and I wrote, they thought I would go quietly. That age would make me compliant. That love would make me blind. They were wrong on all counts. And when the truth comes, it won't whisper. It will roar. By the time Lena's article went live, I was already back in my own home. The RCMP had questioned Melissa and Greg 2 days prior. Patricia warned me not to expect handcuffs or mugshots right away. They were building a case that had to hold in court, not just in the court of public opinion. But Lena's piece changed everything. The silent theft, how one Alberta widow nearly lost everything to a family fraud scheme, that was the headline. It was thorough, damning, and meticulous. She didn't name me outright, only referring to me as Clara D., a retired librarian in her 70s. But the details were unmistakable to anyone who knew us. The fake company, the forged documents, the hidden cameras, the daughter and son-in-law suspected of masterminding the operation. The story ran in every major Alberta outlet by noon. By evening, it was national. I sat on my porch with Evelyn, sipping tea as we listened to the radio. CBC was running a panel discussion on elder abuse. They were quoting Lena's article, quoting me, and all across the country, people were paying attention. At 4:17 p.m., Melissa called. I didn't answer. At 4:23, she texted, "We need to talk, please." At 4:31, another message. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We can fix it, Mom, please." I turned the phone off. Patricia called later that evening. "They've been suspended from all financial duties related to your estate," she said. "The bank has issued a fraud alert. The title transfer is void, and Greg's accounts have been frozen pending further investigation." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "What about charges?" "They'll come. RCMP's coordinating with the Crown now. There's a paper trail a mile long." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "It's not just about me anymore." "I know," she said. Lena's article triggered a flood of calls, dozens of families reaching out, telling similar stories. "We've got something bigger on our hands than we thought." "I want to help," I said. "Whatever comes next, I want to speak up." "You already did," Patricia said, "and people are listening." The next morning, Melissa showed up. Not storming, not screaming, just standing on my porch in a beige coat, holding a bakery box like we were still pretending. I didn't open the door. She knocked once, waited. "Mom," she said through the screen. "Please." I remained still. I messed up, she continued. I let Greg convince me we were helping you, that we were protecting your future. But I see it now. I do. And I'm sorry. The wind rustled through the trees. My hands were steady. She shifted her weight. Can I come in? I finally spoke. No, Melissa, you can't. A pause. Then, defensively, you don't understand what it was like watching you get older, seeing everything slip away. I was scared. No, I said quietly. You were greedy. She exhaled sharply. Do you hate me? I looked her in the eye through the screen door. I don't know what I feel right now, but I know I need distance. She nodded slowly, her eyes glossy. I'll come back, when you're ready. Foreman 80. You don't decide when I'm ready, I said. Not anymore. She turned and walked down the steps, her shoulders hunched. I didn't watch her leave. That night, I called Tyler. He picked up on the second ring. Grandma? Hi, sweetheart. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I swear. I believe you. Dad's been acting weird. Mom, too. I didn't understand why you weren't answering. Then I saw the news. I let the silence hold us for a moment. I'm proud of you, he said, for fighting back. Tears welled in my eyes. Thank you, Tyler. I'm with you, he said. Whatever happens next. Later, I sat in my kitchen with the light off, listening to the quiet. The house finally felt like mine again. No surveillance, no gaslighting, no creeping sense of doubt. Just me. My breath, the sound of wind outside the window. I opened my notebook and turned to a fresh page. At the top I wrote, Aftermath. Below it, I began a list. Financial recovery process. Police cooperation. Legal action pending. Emotional healing. In progress. Melissa. Estranged. Tyler. Ally. I closed the book and smiled. The war wasn't over. But the tide had turned. It had been 6 days since the article went public, and my life was no longer my own, but not in the way it had been before. This time, the invasion wasn't secret cameras or forged papers. This time, it was phone calls, emails, handwritten letters sliding through the mail slot. People from all over the country, women my age, men who had watched their mothers suffer, nurses, retired lawyers, even a woman from Winnipeg who'd been institutionalized by her daughter for 2 years before anyone believed her. They all had one thing in common. They had been silenced. And now, they weren't alone. Patricia and Lena arranged for me to appear on a national morning show, CBC Radio, then Global News. They offered makeup, lights, scripts, but I asked them not to soften anything. If I don't tell the truth plainly, I said, someone out there will think their pain needs to be hidden. End quote. So I told it all. How Melissa had slowly convinced others I was forgetful. How Greg set up fake companies. How I found the first camera and chose to stay silent until I had proof. I talked about love twisted into leverage, trust turned into a weapon. When I finished, the host was speechless. You're remarkably brave, she said. I shook my head. I was just slow to stop doubting myself. And across the country, radios played those words. Televisions carried them into kitchens and waiting rooms and retirement homes. Later that day, the story hit the U.S. circuit, then Europe. The internet dubbed it the quiet fraud. The next morning, I walked to the farmer's market like I always used to before the hiding, before the suspicion. The same vendors were there, Roseanne with her sourdough, Clint with the syrup from his backyard taps, and the Mennonite couple selling apple pies that could make you cry. And every one of them said something. Good for you, Clara. We read the article. You gave voice to all of us. I bought a bag of pears and a jar of strawberry jam, but what I really carried home that day was something heavier responsibility. They saw me as more than just a victim. They saw me as a symbol, and I didn't know what to do with that. That evening, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. I opened it slowly, expecting another message of support. Instead, it read, You ruined my family. He was trying to build a future. You didn't understand him, and now everything's gone. I hope you're happy. MM. I read it twice. Melissa. The handwriting was unmistakable. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in the envelope, and slid it into the folder I kept labeled Evidence, Emotional Coercion. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. She's slipping, Patricia said after I read her the note. "The pressure's getting to her. She knows the case is strong. Is there any chance she'll back off?" Patricia didn't answer immediately. Then, "No. People like Melissa don't retreat. They pivot. She'll try to reposition herself as the wronged daughter, frame this as a misunderstanding. She already has. Let her. But what if people believe her? Then we keep presenting the facts, and we keep telling the truth." A week later, I testified before a special committee in Edmonton about elder fraud and legal exploitation. They asked me what policies needed to change, what systems had failed me. I looked at the room full of lawmakers and said simply, "Believe us the first time." Afterward, a woman from the Alzheimer's Society approached me with a proposal. "Would you speak at our conference next spring?" I agreed before she finished the sentence. Because something in me had shifted. I had spent most of my life in the background. A mother, a widow, a quiet woman who smiled politely and folded other people's laundry during hard conversations. But now I was something else. A witness, a voice, a record, and I wasn't going back. The first time I stood in front of a crowd after all this, I nearly backed out. It was in a modest conference hall just outside Calgary, organized by a coalition of elder advocacy groups. Folding chairs lined up in careful rows, name tags written in neat cursive, a pot of lukewarm coffee in the back that smelled more like comfort than caffeine. I stood behind the podium, microphone humming faintly, heart thudding in my chest. In the front row sat a woman with a walker and oxygen tube. Next to her, a man in a three-piece suit whose name tag read Chief Probate Officer. These weren't strangers. They were survivors, or gatekeepers, or both. I looked at them and thought of the letter Melissa had sent, of the cameras, of the way she used my own love against me. Then I began to speak. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm just a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who didn't realize, until it was nearly too late, that silence could be fatal. They listened. I told them about Greg's schemes, about the offshore accounts, about the fake concern, the manufactured forgetfulness, about how quickly the people around me began to believe her story once she started telling it often enough. "But here's the truth," I said. "It wasn't my age that made me vulnerable. It was my love, my trust, my belief that my daughter could never, would never, do this to me." The room was silent. Not out of boredom, but reverence. "Abuse doesn't always leave bruises," I said. "Sometimes it leaves balance sheets, empty accounts, and the gnawing knowledge that everything you worked for, every spoon you polished, every bill you paid, every bedtime story you told can be taken from you with the stroke of a pen and a forged signature." When I finished, they stood, not just out of politeness, but solidarity. After the conference, a woman named Joyce approached me. She was in her 80s, wearing a thick purple shawl that didn't quite match the summer air. "My son tried to have me declared incompetent," she said, "because I gave too much money to a church he didn't like." I waited. "He said I was being manipulated, that I was losing my grip, but really, he just didn't want me to give his inheritance away." I took her hand. "You're not alone." She looked at me for a long moment. "Neither are you." That night, I returned home to find an envelope on my doorstep. No name, just one word on the front, proof. I brought it inside cautiously, sat at the kitchen table, opened it. Inside was a USB drive. I stared at it for a moment, then plugged it into the old laptop I kept in the laundry room, the one with no internet access, too outdated for anything but basic files. There were 3 video clips. I clicked the first one. It showed Greg, sitting in his office, talking on the phone. "She still doesn't suspect. By next month, we'll have the land title in our hands. Melissa's handling the paperwork. All we need is that last signature. The timestamp was 6 months ago." I opened the second clip. This time, it was Melissa, on the phone, crying, but her words were clear. "I know it's fraud, Greg, but she won't even notice. Her memory's worse than we thought. If we wait too long, she might actually need help. We need to act while she's still technically lucid." A donut was avelatiu. My throat closed. The third video was them both laughing over dinner in some restaurant. Melissa raised a glass. "To early retirement," Greg clinked his. "To inheritance, while they're still alive." I sat frozen. It was one thing to suspect, another to witness it. This was beyond evidence. This was confession. I called Patricia, sent the files. Within the hour, she called back. "This changes everything," she said. "We've got recorded intent. Conspiracy to defraud. This isn't just elder abuse anymore, it's organized fraud." "Where did it come from?" I asked. "Who sent it?" "No idea," she said. "But we'll find out." By the end of the week, the RCMP had issued formal charges: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted misappropriation of assets. Greg was arrested first. Melissa turned herself in a day later. I watched it all from my living room, the news footage, the updates, the mugshots. I felt nothing. No victory, no joy, just silence. But this time, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like space, like the beginning of something new. The day after Melissa turned herself in, I received a visit I hadn't expected. It was Tyler. He didn't call ahead, just knocked softly like he wasn't sure if he was still welcome. I opened the door slowly. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Hi, sweetheart." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside, and he came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Melissa used to feed him oatmeal as a toddler. The house was quiet, heavy with the weight of everything that had come undone. He spoke first. I saw the news, the video clips, everything. I nodded, unsure where this was going. He rubbed his face with both hands. I can't believe it. My parents," his voice broke. "I know. I didn't know, Grandma. I swear to God I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. "Because I did. You're not them." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "How do you forgive something like this?" "I haven't," I said. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You won't," I said, reaching for his hand. He clutched it like it was a lifeline. In the days that followed, I was asked again and again to comment on Melissa's arrest, on Greg's trial, on the implications of a daughter stealing from her mother. I said little. Not because I didn't have thoughts, but because there are some griefs that don't translate into words, some betrayals too intimate to explain. What I did do was keep showing up. I attended every court date, sat in the gallery with my hands folded. I watched Melissa walk in, head low, lawyer by her side. I watched Greg smirk and whisper, arrogant even now, and I didn't look away. Not once. I made eye contact with the truth and let it burn, because if I could survive it, I could witness it. The courtroom was cold, always too cold. The prosecutor laid out everything: the financial trail, the surveillance equipment, the forged documents, and the recorded conversations from the USB. Greg's defense tried to claim manipulation, that Melissa was unstable, that it had all been her idea. Melissa's lawyer tried the opposite, that Greg had pressured her, gaslit her, used her grief and fear to make her complicit. Neither of them denied what happened. They just blamed each other. And me? They barely mentioned me by name. I wasn't a person in their story. I was an asset, a bank account, a barrier to be removed. After the third hearing, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. Tyler sat beside me, silent. Then he said, "She was a good mom. When I was little, I think." "She was," I said, "until she wasn't. Do you think she loved you?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was too complicated for a single moment. Instead, I said, "I loved her. That part I'm sure of." He nodded. Then, very quietly, he asked, "What happens next?" I looked out at the street. The snow beginning to fall, people passing by without knowing what we'd just sat through. "I rebuild," I said, "one piece at a time." Back home, I walked through the house with new eyes. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was hollow, not empty, but waiting for new things to fill it. Not surveillance, not suspicion, but music, laughter, maybe even joy, someday. I went to the spare room and opened the window. Let the cold air in. Let everything else out. I made a cup of tea. I opened my notebook, and I began writing the next chapter. Not of the case. Of my life. Spring arrived slowly that year. It crept in under the door frames, lingered in the softening earth, and unfurled in tiny green shoots from the garden bed I hadn't touched in months. I knelt beside it one afternoon, fingers buried in damp soil, and realized I was planting again. Not just vegetables, but hope. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Tyler came every Sunday now. He never stayed too long, never overstepped. Sometimes he'd fix things, a loose step, a leaky faucet. Sometimes he'd just sit with me on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee between us, the silence comfortable again. One Sunday, he brought an old shoebox filled with photographs. "Found these in the attic," he said. "Thought you might want them." We spent hours sorting through them. There was Melissa at 5, holding a turtle she'd begged to keep. Greg at a barbecue, before I knew what he would become. Tyler as a baby, sleeping on my chest. Each photo was a memory. But not all memories are precious. Some come with edges. Still, I didn't throw a single one away. Because pretending it didn't happen wouldn't help me heal. Owning the story would. Even the ugliest parts. I received a call from Patricia midweek. "Trial date's been set," she said. 6 weeks from now. I exhaled. "That soon?" "They're fast-tracking it. Public pressure, media coverage. They want closure. And you?" "I'll testify. You'll testify. The documents and recordings will do the rest." "And them?" "Greg's lawyer's still playing hardball. Melissa's attorney is floating a plea." I closed my eyes. Of course she is. She wants to avoid jail time, claim coercion, mental strain. End quote. End quote. I would not stand. I opened my eyes. She was in control. She made the choices. Don't let her rewrite it now. "We won't," Patricia said firmly. Then she added, "You don't have to testify if you don't want to." But I knew I would. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth on record from me. That Friday, I drove to the senior center in town. They were hosting a workshop on fraud prevention, and the director, after hearing my story on the radio, asked if I'd speak. I didn't hesitate. I stood in a room full of men and women who looked like me, who carried the same wrinkles, the same quiet dignity, the same fear of being forgotten or worse, used. And I told them what had happened. I told them to trust their instincts, to write things down, to speak up, even when their voices shook. When I finished, a man in the back raised his hand. "What happened to your daughter?" he asked. I paused. "She's waiting for trial," I said. "But that's not the part that matters most to me anymore." "What is?" he asked. I smiled softly. "That I'm not afraid of her anymore." Back home, I sat at the piano for the first time in years. The keys were a little sticky, a few slightly out of tune. But the melody still came slow and familiar, like something I'd almost forgotten I knew. Music filled the house. Not for anyone else, just for me. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Healing isn't loud. It's planting tomatoes, sorting old photographs, saying no and meaning it, sleeping through the night, and playing a broken piano, because the music is still mine. The courtroom was packed the morning of the trial. Journalists filled the gallery, pens poised. Advocates and strangers who had followed the case sat in respectful silence. And I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to Harold's funeral, a quiet uniform of dignity. Melissa sat across the room, dressed in muted tones, her eyes rimmed with carefully applied sorrow. Greg wasn't beside her. He'd chosen to fight the charges separately. His arrogance wouldn't let him stand beside someone else's plea. But Melissa, she had accepted a deal. A partial admission of guilt. No jail time, probation, community service, mandatory restitution. The Crown wanted closure. I wanted the truth. The judge allowed me a statement before sentencing. I stood, walked slowly to the front, and faced the room. But I didn't speak to the judge. I looked straight at my daughter, and I spoke like a mother who had carried a child, not like a victim who had been betrayed. "You were my first love," I said. "My miracle. The girl who made me believe I was more than a widow or a paycheck. I brushed your hair before school, packed your lunches, sat in the car during piano recitals because you were too nervous to go in alone." Melissa didn't look up. "And when your father died, I held both of us together with nothing but grit and borrowed faith." As a grasped, I found this at its. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "I gave you my trust. You gave me silence, manipulation, and shame. But worse than the money, worse than the lies, is this." I paused. "You made me doubt my own mind." A ripple moved through the courtroom. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal with apologies or press releases. It takes years, maybe forever. But I will not carry your guilt for you. Not anymore. I turned toward the judge. I ask the court not for punishment, but for protection. Not just for me, but for every elder who's been told they're confused when they're really being stolen from. Then I sat down. And I didn't cry. Because this time, the power belonged to me. After the hearing, reporters crowded outside. I said nothing. Patricia stood beside me, shielding me with her presence. Tyler drove us home. We didn't talk much. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't avoidance. It was peace. When we got to the house, he carried my bag inside, kissed my cheek, and said, "I'm proud of you, Grandma." I smiled. I'm proud of me too. 2 weeks later, I received a check in the mail. Restitution. A partial return of what they had stolen. The first of several payments Melissa was now legally required to make. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it in the drawer beside the forged power of attorney and the recorder that had changed everything. A reminder. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd reclaimed. That evening, I walked the property line. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp soil. The fields were bare now, waiting for summer. Waiting for what comes next. I stood by the fence and looked out at the land that had almost been taken. Not just the acres, but the legacy, the truth, and I whispered into the breeze, "Not this time." Then I turned and walked back home. The summer came early that year. The trees bloomed like they'd been holding their breath through a long winter, and even the bird song seemed more insistent, like the world was determined to remind me it could begin again. I leaned into it. For the first time in a decade, I painted the porch swing, cleaned out the attic. I even let Tyler teach me how to use a tablet. We set it up together, just the essentials, email, news, weather, and one app I never thought I'd need, Zoom, because invitations had started arriving. Panels, lectures, interviews. People wanted me to speak, not as a victim, but as an advocate, as a survivor. I said yes to almost everything. In July, I stood in front of a conference in Toronto, hundreds of elder law attorneys, financial advisors, and social workers in one giant, over-air-conditioned ballroom. I told them what no policy manual would. That abuse doesn't always wear a villain's face, that sometimes it wears a daughter's, that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who still has a key to your house. Afterward, a young lawyer approached me. She looked barely 30, with bright eyes and a notepad full of furious scribbles. "My mother is going through something similar," she whispered. I thought maybe she was being paranoid, but now, she trailed off. I touched her arm gently. "Listen to her." She nodded, and I saw tears bloom. Another story just beginning. Another life I'd never know, but had helped change. One afternoon in August, I found Melissa's necklace in a drawer. A tiny gold charm she wore through high school. I'd given it to her for her 16th birthday, a gift Harold had helped pick out. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then I walked it out to the back garden and buried it beneath the rosemary bush. Not out of anger, but closure. Some things belong in the past. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. From Melissa. Handwritten. 3 pages. I sat on the porch and read it once, slowly. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't known how to ask for help, that she had let fear turn to desperation, that Greg had left her taken what little was left of their money and fled the province. She said she was alone now, that she missed me, that she hoped one day I'd let her back in. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't write back. Some silences are sacred. Some distances are survival. Tyler and I planted tomatoes in early September. He brought the seedlings. I brought the stubbornness. We bickered over spacing and fertilizer. We laughed. At one point, he looked up and said, "You seem lighter." "I am," I said. He nodded. "You're healing." I smiled at him. "No, sweetheart. I'm living." Autumn arrived like a sigh, slow and golden. The days shortened, the air sharpened, and my porch swing creaked with a rhythm that felt like memory set to music. It was my favorite season. Always had been. Not just for the colors, but for the honesty. Autumn doesn't pretend. It lets things go. One crisp morning, I received a call from a woman named Donna Liu, an editor with a small press in Vancouver. "I read your story in the Globe," she said, And then I watched your conference talk in Toronto. Have you ever considered writing a book? I laughed. I'm 71 years old, Donna. You're 71 years powerful, she corrected. That made me quiet. I don't know how to write a book, I admitted. You've already written it, she said. In your testimony, in your speeches, in your notebooks. We just need to shape it. By November, I was working with a ghostwriter named Evelyn. Not my Evelyn, though the coincidence made me smile. She was kind, efficient, and didn't ask me to relive anything I didn't want to. We met weekly, always in my home. She drank too much tea and left sticky notes on everything. She called the project While I Wasn't Looking. I didn't argue, because it was true. It was during the times I trusted most, when I believed I was safe, loved, protected, that the betrayal had taken root. But now, I was reclaiming the narrative, one page at a time. Meanwhile, Melissa's restitution continued. Each check arrived like a cold reminder, not just of the crime, but of the fact that consequences had come. Greg was still missing. Warrants issued. International flags raised. But I had stopped checking the updates, because whatever became of him, it was no longer my burden. Melissa, on the other hand, had sent 2 more letters. I hadn't opened them, but I hadn't thrown them away either. They sat in a drawer beside the others. Symbols of something unresolved, but not unimportant. I didn't hate her, but I no longer felt responsible for her choices. That, too, was freedom. Tyler's visits became a fixture in my life. He brought puzzles, soup, and on one Saturday, his girlfriend, Emily. She was lovely, smart, warm-eyed, and shy around me until I cracked a joke about Tyler's inability to plant a straight row of tomatoes. After dinner, she stayed back while Tyler loaded leftovers into their car. He talks about you all the time, she said. Says you're the strongest person he knows. I smiled. He exaggerates. No, she said. He doesn't. As relighted. For a moment, the air between us held something sacred connection, passed between generations of women, forged not by blood, but by recognition. She hugged me before she left. I hugged her back like someone who remembered what it meant to be trusted. One night, as I was closing the curtains, I paused at the window. The land was quiet. The cameras were gone. The shadows were just shadows again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what might be watching, because I had watched back, and I had won. The book was finished by winter. It arrived in a small box, 6 advance copies, the cover soft and matte beneath my fingers. On it was no photo of me, just a single window with a curtain slightly drawn back. While I Wasn't Looking, a mother's story of love, loss, and survival. By Clara Dupree. Holding it made everything real in a new way. Not the betrayal that had always been real, but the triumph. I had turned pain into permanence. The launch was quiet, just as I wanted. A local bookstore in Edmonton hosted a reading, chairs set in a semicircle, tea and cookies at the back. Tyler stood near the coat rack, looking nervous and proud all at once. Evelyn, my ghostwriter, not my neighbor, introduced me gently, then stepped aside. I read one short passage aloud. It wasn't the chapter about Melissa. It wasn't about the cameras or the trial. It was about the day I found my strength again, the day I chose to say nothing, to let her keep watching, because I had decided to watch back. I didn't shout, I read. I didn't run. I became still, and in that stillness I remembered who I was. When I finished, no one clapped. They just stood, slowly, one by one. I've never heard silence so loud. After the reading, a woman approached me. Gray hair, kind eyes, trembling hands. She whispered, "Your book saved me." I didn't ask for details. She didn't owe them. I just took her hands in mine and said, "You saved yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." The weeks that followed felt different, lighter. There were still hard days, moments when I caught a glimpse of Melissa's smile in a photograph and felt that familiar ache. But grief had become a season, not a storm. It passed, and left behind something fertile. In mid-February, I was nominated for a national award, Voices for Justice, given annually to citizens who made lasting contributions to protecting vulnerable populations. Patricia called to tell me, "They want you to speak again," she said. At the gala, I laughed. "I'm going to need another navy suit." "Wear something red," she said. "You've earned bold." At the gala, Tyler escorted me. He wore a tie that didn't quite match his shirt, but I didn't care. When they called my name, I walked up slowly, not to applause, but to purpose. And when I reached the podium, I didn't bring notes. I brought truth. I am not a hero, I said. I am not a victim. I am simply someone who said, enough. And sometimes, that's all it takes. I looked out at the crowd, lawmakers, judges, social workers, strangers who'd become allies. But if you remember one thing from tonight, I added, let it be this. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. Sometimes, they're just watching and waiting, and then they did applaud. But more than that, they understood. It was a Sunday morning when Melissa called again. The number came up as unknown, but I knew it was her. I'd ignored the last few attempts. This time, though, something in me felt still. I answered. Hi, Mom, she said. Her voice was small, tired. I heard about the award. I didn't speak. I read the book, she continued. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. Still, I said nothing. I don't expect anything from you, she said after a moment. I just wanted you to know. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying. That word, trying, I let it sit between us. Then I said, that's good. A pause. That's all? I took a breath. Melissa, you and I, we may never be what we were. Some things broke that can't be put back the same way. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm healing. She let out a shaky exhale. I hope one day, maybe, I said. But today is enough. I didn't promise anything. And for once, neither did she. That afternoon, Tyler came over with Emily. They brought groceries, and we cooked dinner together. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with too much butter, the kitchen filled with warmth and garlic and laughter. Emily sat beside me after dinner and asked softly, do you ever wish it hadn't happened? Any of it? I stirred my tea, thought for a moment. Of course, I said. But wishing doesn't change the past. Have it understand, on the Davis end, and if it hadn't happened, I added, I might never have learned how strong I really am. She smiled. That's powerful. I nodded. So is survival. Later that night, I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the dark fields. The land was quiet again. Safe. My house no longer whispered with hidden eyes or unspoken threats. It hummed now with memory, with resilience, and with possibility. I turned off the lights, one by one, and walked to my bedroom. Before bed, I picked up my notebook. The last page. I wrote. I watched. I waited. I acted. And I survived. This is not just my story. It's a warning, a prayer, and a promise. We are not invisible, and we are not done. Then I closed the book and turned off the light. This story reminded me that love, even in its purest form, can be manipulated, and that silence, when born of fear, can be dangerous. But it also taught me something more powerful, that reclaiming your voice, no matter how late, is always possible. We are never too old to demand respect, never too small to stand up for truth, and never too broken to rebuild. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to say, enough. And that, in itself, can change everything.